The nucleus is the powerhouse of the cell. This is an oxbow lake. The German word for environmentally unfriendly is Umweltverschmutzung. I can honestly say, in the 10 years since I left school, none of those things has helped me in the slightest. But since then, a lot's happened. I graduated from university, moved to the other side of the world, and qualified as a teacher myself. In this video, I'll be talking about 5 things that I wish kids were taught about in school. Hi, I'm Harry, and on this channel I explore the ideas that come to me as I read, listen and learn my way through life. So I initially came up with the idea for this video on a bus ride, and by the end of the journey there were already over 20 things on my list. I've divided them into 4 broad categories: learning, mindset, practical skills, happiness. In this video I'm going to focus on 5 things that have made me a better learner, and they're things that I think every kid deserves to know and understand when they're in school. I'm not going to say exactly when each thing should be taught, and I think there's some room for debate there, but I think each of these things is something that at some point during my education I wish I'd known, and looking back I wish I'd had access to that information much sooner. The 80-20 rule. So I'm not a detail-oriented person, and I never have been. When someone explains something to me, or I'm trying to get my head around a new concept, I just want the gist. Just give me the main points, give me the overview first. In school, a thorough and systematic approach to all topics is praised, while my brand of big picture thinking is often mistaken for laziness or lack of effort. If I'd known about the 80-20 principle earlier in life, then I would have felt less guilty about my instinctive reluctance to get bogged down in details and to look at the bigger picture. In school, you're often encouraged to look at details and to study everything meticulously and carefully, whereas my desire to look at the big picture all the time wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but at the time I remember being made to feel as though it was a type of laziness. The 80-20 principle, which can be found in countless areas of life, from nature to economics and everything in between, states that roughly 80% of outcomes come from 20% of the inputs. 20% of the population owns 80% of wealth. 20% of drivers cause 80% of accidents. The list goes on. When you sit an exam, for example, it's quite likely that 80% of the marks can be got from 20% of the core content or skills that's being taught. Despite this, I have really vivid memories of just tramping into a biology lesson, opening the textbook at a random page and just delving into that information without being given an outline about the general structure of the course we were following. I always felt like the message from the teachers was, teacher knows best, open your books to this page and study in minute detail, and don't worry about the bigger picture, we'll take care of that for you. Also, we were given no indication as to the relevance of the topic we were covering come exam time. So obviously I can still trot out the odd phrase from this time, the nucleus is the powerhouse of the cell or whatever, but I really don't remember the teacher ever scoping out the entire term or the entire year's work so that as a learner I could look at what things come up again and again, I could start to prioritize what things were most important. I feel like sometimes kids aren't given the right amount of respect, and kids can be trusted with more information, and if you gave them a scope of what they're going to be learning in a given term or a given year, they could start to prioritize their learning. I think it's foolish to try and trick a kid into thinking that every single thing they learn is of equal importance. If they taught me the 80-20 rule sooner, I might have had a sense of the core structure of that given year, that given term, or even that given month's work. A more diligent student than I would then study ahead, but my gist-seeking 80-20 brain would at least have a sense of which key topics were important, pricking up my ears when I heard a key phrase. It would have been really encouraging for me to learn the 80-20 rule, so I knew that when I was looking for that bigger picture, I was looking for that broad gist of a topic. I wasn't being lazy, I was in fact trying to prioritize and be effective. Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time allotted to it. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute to do. As I progressed through school, another way in which I was mistaken for being a lazy student was my terrific capacity for procrastination. My own habit for procrastination followed me from school to university. Perhaps it was foolish, but I thought that I could hammer out essays the night before like I used to do at school. And when I got to uni, I found out that this was far from being the case. So why had no one taught me Parkinson's law? And why had no one told me that procrastination and battling deadlines are things that people face the world over and that they're perfectly natural? Once you understand Parkinson's law, there are ways to turn it to your advantage. Breaking a task into subtasks and setting artificial deadlines work particularly well for me nowadays, as does using accountability partners. School taught me that good students work harder than bad students, and that's that. Naturally, I took myself to be a bad student as a consequence. I had to find out for myself that I'm actually perfectly capable of meeting a deadline. But time management was never on the syllabus at school. Active recall and spaced repetition. So I've been a teacher for 8 years now. I often hear my colleagues give vague instructions like do some revision over the weekend or practice those irregular verbs over the weekend. However, I know for a fact that these students have never actually received clear instructions on where to begin with revising. I also know that if a student or indeed a parent asked the teachers about this, the answer they receive would be far from satisfactory. Reading, rereading notes, copying down, highlighting things in a rainbow of colours, all of these things don't help us learn, but there are actually scientifically proven ways to help you learn. We're just not taught about them at school. Among the only concrete and scientifically proven methods for learning is active recall and spaced repetition. Simply put, actively trying to retrieve information, even if you fail many times to do so, is far more effective at forming memories than simply exposing yourself to the information repeatedly. Yes, even in bright colours. Methods such as flashcards, testing oneself with a partner, or simply covering parts of the book actually work, as your brain has to exert a lot of effort to recall what it needs. Similarly, it's proven that exposure to a piece of information is more effective if done spaced over several repetitions. This flies in the face of the typical marathon revision sessions that were praised when I was at school. There are plenty of apps and websites available nowadays with precise algorithms that resurface content just at the moment you're about to forget them. My last video was a summary of the book How We Learn by Benedict Carey. It details a number of scientifically proven methods of learning, including active recall and spaced repetition. So why are we leaving these things to chance when we have a mathematically proven way of guaranteeing our students can succeed? Rather than making use of the things that science has taught us about education, we teach kids that remembering information is a matter of how much effort you put in and how smart you are, when these things are palpably not true. Nowadays, we don't need to rely on students' hard work and diligence and placing all of the effort onto them when we have mathematical ways of guaranteeing they can succeed. So I find it remarkable that I didn't know anything about it until I was a fully grown adult and I was a teacher myself. How to critically consume information in a world of overabundance. I feel like the biggest challenge facing the education system right now is how to cope with the age of the internet. Almost overnight, we've gone from a world of information scarcity to a world of information overabundance. In my parents' generation, the teacher's job was to transfer knowledge from themselves to the student, and the learner's job was to listen, understand, and apply what they learned. But now we live in a world where almost all of humanity's knowledge can fit into a device that fits in my pocket. As a result, our education system has become less about finding information and more about filtering information. I remember my dad telling me about writing his dissertation. He had to travel to various archives and read through documents in order to discover the facts about the historical period he was studying. The information was scarce. When I reflect on my own university experience, I faced the exact opposite challenge. I merely had to type the keywords of my essay into Google, and I'd be faced with a catalogue of articles and resources so vast and overwhelming I didn't know where to begin. His generation were mining diamonds. I was panning for gold. I had to sift through so much irrelevant, often misleading information, and if I didn't pay strict attention, a little glimmer would escape my notice, and a nugget of truth would be lost in the murky waters. This baffling process of filtering information was only really clarified for me in university in my last year when I studied epistemology, which is the philosophical study of knowledge itself. To break it down, epistemology basically studies how we know what we know, and how we can filter and evaluate different types of knowledge. I learned about probability, how to determine causality between two events instead of mere correlation. I learned about Occam's razor and other philosophical tools for finding likely explanations. Now, obviously not for one moment am I suggesting that, say, primary school age kids need to be given a thorough grounding in complex philosophy, but from the youngest age possible, kids should be building up a mental toolkit that not only allows them to acquire and store information, but also critique, analyze, and evaluate that information. And this all starts with questioning. Kids should be taught to question everything their teacher tells them, and they need a few key mental tools to help them to do this. They should be able to distinguish between stories and statistics, between appeals to emotion and hard facts. These fundamental distinctions should start as early as possible in order to prepare kids for our information-rich world. How to build a second brain. Your mind is for having ideas, not holding them. David Allen. As soon as I heard that quote, I knew that intuitively it was true, at least for me. It takes a huge amount of mental effort just to hold on to information. The strain of holding on to a statistic, an analogy, a formula, a quote, a date, these things massively detract from our ability to do high-order thinking. It's difficult to do high-order and creative thinking when so much of our mental bandwidth is taken up by simply recalling old information. How often have you searched for a fact in your head, only to be faced by a number of preliminary questions, like, where did I learn this? When did I hear this? Who told me this? Where did I read this? Your chances of accurately recalling that information are pretty slim, and your chances of applying it to something else are even slimmer. This is where the second brain comes in. For the past few years, I've constructed a system for storing ideas. The notes and quotes I take from books, ideas of my own that come to me when I'm sitting on the train, useful links and resources shared to me by friends, they all go into the system. I use digital tools like note-taking apps and searchable databases to ensure that my ideas don't just disappear into the ether. When I discovered that such a system was not just possible but really easy to set up, it completely revolutionized my way of thinking. Now I feel motivated to learn and research all different kinds of subjects because now I'm confident that that information won't just drift in one ear and out the other, it's going to go into a system where I can recall it forever. For me, this makes the act of learning so much more rewarding and worthwhile because I know that there's a degree of permanence involved. But imagine if I'd had this second brain set up the first day I'd entered school. I could refer back year on year on a growing bank of my own work, my own ideas, and my own resources. Nothing forgotten, nothing lost. When approaching a new topic, I could search my second brain to see if I'd ever covered it before, or if there were related topics I could link to what I'm studying now. Instead, our schoolwork feels ephemeral, and each subject is disparate and non-overlapping. We study topics in isolation, only to forget them as we move on to the next one. A second brain that you build while you're at school will be a priceless resource. It would be like your own private Wikipedia that's made in your own style and just for your own eyes. A constantly compounding vault of your own knowledge, interpretation, and perspectives. So I'd be really intrigued to know if you agree with the things that I've selected. Maybe you feel that some of the things I mentioned are taught in school already. I'm sure that different school systems around the world have different approaches, and maybe some of them include the things that I've mentioned here. If you were taught some of these kind of meta skills that I'm talking about here when you were at school, then comment down below with how old you were, what kind of school you went to, and what country you were studying in, because I'd be interested to know if different education systems around the world have different approaches to teaching these kind of meta learning skills. In the next video, I'll talk about 5 things we can teach in school to improve students' mindset. So if you don't want to miss that, then click subscribe below. Cheers.